I never made it until I was 27. Jim Morrison died at 27. You know.
This album was written and recorded at the beginning during the pandemic, and during the pandemic we could have imagined that it would get better after, but it's not the case. And is the album reflecting this? Or?
Well, yeah, I wrote the songs in lockdown, so they're quite reflective because, of course, when you were kind of forced to be at home, all you had to do was think. But I think that the people who dealt with lockdown the best were artists, because you could create things with it. So in that sense, for an artist, good came out of it because of this. But I hated all the masks thing and all that, and I think the whole thing was a gross overreaction by governments around the world, brought on by the neurosis of the internet and fucking idiots on the internet, the usual fucking bullshit. And since then, yeah, well, you know, the world has not recovered from it, and probably never will, you know. And then we just wait for the next one.
That's a shame. And for an artist from UK, is it more and more difficult to go to here in Europe, because you need visas, because it's more expensive for instruments, for guitars?
Yeah. Well, I haven't toured since Brexit. I don't think. So it's, instead of spending 2 weeks in France, and I'll be spending 10 days in the whole of Europe, and you just do the capital cities. And it's the fans that suffer, do you know what I mean? But if you can't afford it, you can't afford it, you know. And the music business in general, there's not a lot of money in it anymore, because people don't buy records anymore. But it's tough, because say for instance I play in Paris in November. If you live in Lyon, or you live in, you know, in the south of France somewhere,
Marseille.
Yeah, you have to travel, you know, because I'm not going to go to Marseille, and I'm not going to go down other parts of the country. So yeah, it's tough times, but you know, I suppose there you go. What can you do, you know?
You have a song, Easy Now. It's one of the most powerful songs in this album. Do you imagine the reaction of the audience, of the public, when you will play it on stage?
I imagined the audience and the reaction when I was writing it. I knew it. Because it's quite a familiar sound, and it sounds reminiscent of what I wrote in the 90s. And it's as good as anything that I wrote in the 90s, I think. Yeah, I think it's going to be great, you know. But there's quite a few on the record that I think will go down well. But that one in particular, I knew it straight away. I just knew it. You could just feel it. You know, the chorus is great. You know.
Yeah, you can imagine the audience.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of singing.
There is another song, Pretty Boy, which seems blessed by the gods of music. So it's written and composed by you, but Johnny Marr is playing on this track. And then there is a remix by Robert Smith.
Yeah.
So it's Noel Gallagher, Johnny Marr, Robert Smith. It's a kind of all-star team, all-star dream, I would say.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you know, when I wrote it and when I was recording it, it started to sound like The Cure, and then obviously Johnny played on it, and then it started to sound like, you know, well, Johnny, and then I was just listening to it one night, and I had the notion that maybe Robert Smith would do a remix, and I didn't even know that he did remixes, and I just managed to get his email off. I've never met him, I don't know him, and I managed to get his email off somebody, And I just sent him the track. And I was convinced that he would just dismiss it immediately. I didn't think, and I still don't know, because I've only met him briefly for about 10 seconds at a Cure concert. I thought, he's not going to like Oasis. He's not going to like me. But I just sent it anyway. And it turns out he fucking loves it. I was like, wow.
Johnny Marr is a friend of yours since a long time.
Yeah.
But do you remember and do you want to tell us when you first met him and first talked to him?
I met him, he has a brother called Ian, who was in electronic for a while. And it's a long story, but you have to stick with it. I was in Manchester. When Johnny was in I bought their most recent record, which was called Dusk at the time. And I was coming back from the record shop and I bumped into Ian, and he seen that I had a copy of Dusk. And I knew Ian, but I didn't know he was Johnny's brother, right? I had no idea. I knew Ian from going in the Hacienda, and he said, "Oh, my brother's on that record." And I was like, "Who's your brother?" And he said, "Oh, Johnny." And I was like, "Johnny Marr?" And he said, "Yeah." And he asked me, I told him I was in a band, and he said, "Oh, have you got a demo?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "If you've got it, I'll give it to Johnny." And I said, "Okay." And I gave him the tape, and then a couple of days later, Johnny Marr called me at home and said he liked it, and did I want to go for a drink? And we went to a bar and sat and talked about music, and I was like, no words. And then we just became great friends, and that was it. And this is before we even had a record deal. We had no manager, nothing. And he was the first person outside of the guys in the band who showed any interest in it at all. No one in Manchester was fucking remotely interested in what we were doing. And then Johnny was like, "This is great, who writes the songs?" And I was like, "Well, I write the songs." And he's been very supportive. And even now to this day, you know, if I'm in the studio and like I'm doing Pretty Boy and I'm struggling with it and I'm kind of like thinking it needs something, but I don't know what it is, I can call Johnny and just say, "What are you doing next week?" And he'll you know, he comes to the studio and plays on it. He's fucking amazing. And he's got the Holy Spirit in him. He's got the spirit of, and it goes without saying he's an astonishing guitarist, but he's a really great guy as well. I love him, yeah. The way that he works is quite astonishing, because he won't listen to the track before he comes to the studio. He has no idea what he's doing. He'll come down, he'll have maybe 2 guitars and some effects pedals, and he just comes in and he listens to the track for the first time and he goes, "Oh, okay." And then he just plays, you know, and more often than not, he gets it really quickly. And so for Pretty Boy, he kind of played a couple of things, and then it was within, I'd say, the first half an hour that he played the riff, and it was like, that's it. And then we just worked on that, and honestly, I mean, I don't know, there's no words to describe how it feels when one of your heroes and is a fan of yours and vice versa, and then it all comes together. It's a great feeling. I've met most of my heroes, or the ones that are alive, and they've all been great, you know. I don't know whether it's a mutual respect thing between artists or what have you, but they've all been really great and inspiring and just how you would imagine them to be, you know. I mean, you know, it's difficult when they meet, or if you're a member of the public and you're asking for something, and sometimes artists can be in a bad mood and, you know, you can be disappointed in them. But I guess there's a mutual respect between artists to some degree, so. But yeah, everyone I've ever met has been fucking amazing. Yeah. Well, yeah, the waiting for the train that never comes is kind of metaphor for the chances that you hope you're going to get. And they never seem to materialize. For example, I never made it until I was 27. Jim Morrison died at 27, you know. So musicians tend to get there quite young, and I didn't. But I always had the hope, and I loved music, and I was in it for the music anyway. I wasn't in it to be successful, but I wanted to be successful. But yeah, I mean that song is a great song, and yeah, the song it's about trying to find some kind of beauty and peace within the concrete and things that are just drab and dreary.
Yeah. Francisca is also the name of this album, and the cover is brilliant. It's a roundabout with instruments. How did you get this idea?
Well, it's that roundabout. Are you into football at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Manchester City's old ground, Main Road, that's the centre circle. So when they knocked it down, they built a council estate around the centre circle, and it just seemed to fit the whole vibe of the record. And yeah, it's just, Oasis did 2 very significant gigs there, and I seen Pink Floyd there, and I seen Guns N' Roses there, and I grew up there, and it's a significant place. It just seemed to all fit,
You were talking about football, and I've read somewhere that you have your own studio now in London, and there is something from Pep Guardiola in this.
Yeah, the cardboard cutout.
So what it is?
Well, he's just overseeing everything. It's kind of like he's an inspiring guy, and I know him, and I've hung out with him, and he's a really inspiring dude. And yeah, he's in the corner with a City scarf on. Just sometimes if I'm struggling, I think, what would Pep do? What would he do? And then usually I get the answer.
In this studio in London, there is a piece from another important person. It's Paul Weller. Can you tell us about it?
Oh, he made he made a sign. He had somebody make a sign for me that says Lone Star, and yeah, he's a good friend of mine. In fact, he's a neighbour. He lives literally around the corner from me, so I see him quite a lot. And yeah, I love him. I love him dearly. He's a good friend.
And he was one of the heroes you were talking
about.
Before.
Yeah. Well, the Jam and the Smiths, Stone Roses.
Yeah.
But that's it. Joy Division. That's it.
And do you remember also the first time you met him? You met
Weller?
Weller?
Yeah. First time I met him was at Glastonbury Festival in 1994, and somebody, I think it was a journalist, he was just with a tape recorder, was interviewing me and said, I've just interviewed Paul Weller, and he says he really likes Oasis. And I could see Paul Weller in the distance, and I just walked up to him and shook his hand, and we've been friends ever since.
Oh.
Yeah, he's an amazing dude. I mean, fucking, wow. He is an amazing dude. Yeah, genius.
What's your best memories of concert gig, maybe festival in France?
Well, played with Neil Young. Oasis played with Neil Young in the Zenith, I think. And obviously the catastrophic night that Oasis broke up. We played, we've played everywhere in Paris. And we've had great, even the Oasis years and High Flying Birds have always had a great connection with France. I had 2 French girls in my band. So, yeah, for people from England, it's kind of like, it's so close, it's the nearest country to us. And it's the first place you kind of come when you get a passport. And there's a kind of grudging respect between France and England. Nobody will mention it, everyone like, yeah, and the French are like, yeah, fucking that lot. But really, we're kind of quite similar, I think. Even when, like, your friends, or, for instance, like, talking to Weller on the phone and say, what you up to? I say, I'm going to Paris tomorrow. And he'd be like, oh, fucking, everybody loves it, So that tells its own story, I think. And there's a lot of really big British bands, going back to the Beatles, who've done legendary concerts in Paris. Legendary, And American bands, Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles and the Stones and everyone, you know, Stone Roses, everyone.
Now you have your own studio in London. Could you imagine record an album in France, maybe a part of an album?
Well, actually, funnily enough, right, in the mid-90s, I had the idea that Oasis were going to move to Paris for a few months and record in Paris, and it never quite materialised. I don't know what happened. We never got so far as finding a studio, but we were going to do it, and I don't know why we never did it. In the end, it was always we were going to go to Paris for the spring and all that kind of thing, and it never came to anything, which is a shame. But I'd like to record. Yeah, I'd love to. Now I've got my own studio. I don't need to, but it'd be great. Yeah, to spend, you know, because usually when you come to Paris, you spend like a weekend or a few days. But it'd be great to spend a few months here and really, really get to know it. Do you know what I mean? Because you only, like all the great cities in the world, like Berlin and Paris, and you see them as a tourist mainly, because you see the you know, the bright lights. But to be here for a few months and really get to know it would be amazing. But who knows? Maybe one day. Yeah.
You were mentioning the catastrophic night of Rock en Seine when Oasis broke up. The guitar, the famous guitar of this night, was sold in auction recently.
Yeah.
What did you think of it? This sold.
Firstly, that guitar I bought in Paris, right? In the Pigalle somewhere, and I never liked it. I fucking hated that guitar. It was horrible. And if one guitar had to be sacrificed, that was going to be the one. And the guy bought it off me. It was like smashed to bits. And of course, I didn't think he was ever going to put it back together, and he did. So, good luck to him. It's a shit guitar.
So there was a curse from the beginning.
Yeah, I never wrote a single song on it. No, I used to take it on tour as a spare for my original one. I don't think I ever played it. Maybe like once or twice. It was cursed.
Yeah, it was cursed from the beginning.
Yeah.
So, do you have one guitar, and she's the guitar, she's writing the best songs?
Well, I've got a three. Yeah, I've got a few. The current ones that I use at the moment, I've got my main guitars. I've got a Martin D28 that I had made for me in 2011, and then I've got a Gibson J150 which I bought a few years ago off the internet, off eBay, right? And I thought I'd buy it as a spare, and it's the best guitar I've ever bought. It's fucking unbelievable. It's amazing. And then I've got a black Stratocaster which was given to me by The Edge, and I've got my 355 that I bought many years ago in London. But yeah, I own a lot of guitars and still play the same 4 guitars. I've got fucking loads of them. I do love them though. I love looking at them. I love them.
Do you talk to them?
No.
Give me the key, give me the
No. But I do believe that, you know, I do believe there's music in them. So for example, if I've got a guitar at home and I've had it for 6 months and I've not written anything, if I send that guitar back to my studio and get another one, ordinarily something will happen because you've changed it up a little bit. But I do believe that they've got, you know, if you buy a guitar that's 50 years old, that's been owned by 7 different people, you know, and the first guy that owned it was in 1960, you know, something that's kind of lived and it's breathed and it's had people's sweat on it. That's kind of spiritual, I think.
Yeah, there is a kind of legacy.
Yeah. So there must be, and it's kind of a, you know, they're made out of wood and it's a living thing, you know, and they kind of they expand and shrink and grow. I mean, we could get deep into it, which we shouldn't do here, but we can get deep into it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.